great. Thank you for coming up, and thank you for all the financial people making their way to the fourth floor in the corner, away from the rest of the conference. I'm not sure why that always happens to the financial people. So the title of today's session is Show Me the Money, Financial Resources to Help Your Brand Flourish. So when we were meeting as a group, we weren't really sure what the topic meant, so we came up with some things that hopefully everybody will enjoy, and if you want to ask a lot of questions and make this as interactive as possible, that would be great. So before we get started, we'll have all the panel participants introduce themselves, tell them a little bit, they'll tell you about their brand, what they're doing, and then we'll try to level set and see who's in the room and try to address some of the questions that way. So Kim, you want to kick it off and introduce yourself?
Sure. I want to make sure. Great. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Kim Gubera. I'm the president and CEO of Pirtek, USA and also Canada. And Pirtek is a little bit of a niche franchise. We do hydraulic and industrial hose repair, primarily in the mobile arena, but also we have brick and mortar, 144 locations in the US and 2 in Canada, and then there's also an additional 300 across the world, actually in 21 other countries that I'm not involved with personally. As for myself, I have a background in accounting. That was my discipline. I am a CPA. I keep my license up in case this goes bad. Hasn't so far, so that's good. That's why I'm here, obviously. 23 years in franchising. And I'm very passionate about franchising, very passionate about the role that financial acumen and understanding plays for the franchisee in the success of their franchising. So happy to be here.
All right.
Erik?
Hi, everyone. I'm Erik Frederick. I am the president and CEO of Pizzeria Uno. We make pizza. Most people know us for our Chicago deep dish pizza. We also make a thin crust and a lot of other things too in the casual dining space. I am brand new to franchising and restaurant. I started off as the CFO of Uno after years and years of retail. A lot of similarities with multi-site, but I was the CFO in June of 2018. And then was promoted to CEO of Uno in April of 2020. I absolutely love the franchise business. I wish I got involved years and years ago, but it's been a phenomenal ride over the last 5 years, and looking forward to learning even more over the course of the conference.
Thanks, Erik. Ryan?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Zink. That's close. I'm the CEO and founder of Franchise Sidekick. We help people reduce their risk when finding a franchise. Prior to that, I was a franchisor of Complete Nutrition. We started that in 2005, grew it to a couple of hundred locations, and we sold it. And then after Complete Nutrition, I co-founded a franchise sales organization called Franchise Fastlane. So they help, we help franchisors who we believe are the next big thing grow across the country. So they're doing a great job. We brought on private equity a little over a year and a half ago, and now made our first acquisition of Raintree. So between Raintree and Fastlane and Sidekick, we award somewhere in the ballpark of 2,400 franchises a year. So my knowledge on funding is going to be really around the sales process and getting the money needed for getting a franchisee ready and prepared.
Thanks, Ryan. Steve?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Steve White. I am the President and Chief Operating Officer of PuroClean, and PuroClean operates in the property restoration space. So every day, bad things happen where people live and work, water, fire, mold damage, and they can't live or work there again until one of my franchisees comes and cleans it up. So I am 37 years in franchising at this point. My career started in the headquarters of Domino's Pizza, and later went into the graphic arts space, commercial printing and signs, and I actually was recruited out of retirement to do this 10 years ago this month, and we've had phenomenal growth at PuroClean, and so I've been around the space in many different aspects for a long, long time.
All right, thanks, Steve. And I'm Michael Iannuzzi. I'm a CPA, and I co-lead Citrin Cooperman's franchise accounting and consulting practice. We do all the audit work for the financial statements that go into the FDD for the franchisor, tax planning consulting. We also do software integration where we can automate franchisee reporting and KPIs and things like that. So that's a little bit about us. So quick show of hands, how many have less than 100 units in the room? All right, and anybody over 100? Okay, so that's a good level set for what we're going to be addressing. So like I said earlier, we were a little, we were trying to figure out what the topic was going to be. So we came up with some questions that we think will address everybody here, and anybody wants to jump in while we're talking, please, feel free. As you heard this morning from the first two speakers, it's all about the franchisees. So we're going to start the questions from the bottom up. We'll start with what we think the franchisees need and how you can help your franchisees, and then we'll make our way up to the franchisor, and then anything else that you may want to speak about. So Kim, we'll kick it off with you. So if you don't mind, can you give us the important, why do you think it's important for franchisees to maintain good, accurate, timely financial statements, and why they need to run their business profitably?
Well, especially for this group, I would say, in fact, I just met someone this morning and he said, we haven't even started yet, what advice would you give us? And I said, do things right from the beginning. And so that's one thing I would say is make sure you have things set up for the franchisees to be able to monitor their progress, and for us even it's our day-to-day, especially if labor is a big thing. It's something you need to know almost on a daily basis. So make sure you have some infrastructure for them in that regard. But the franchisee needs to know where they're at. They need to know where they should be going. And you help them, of course, hopefully get there in some of that, for some of that. But then down the road, or maybe even more, most of our guys come in with a good amount of money, but down the road they may need additional financing for expansion. And you need financials to do that. And you need good, solid financials, not one that looks like a roller coaster, hopefully, but some consistency there. So there's many things. It's going to save you time by having good financial information. In other words, when it comes to tax time, you're not, as a franchisee, they're not scurrying around trying to figure out where everything is and what happened in the last year. But really, it's to give them a pulse of what's going on in the business.
So Kim, before we pass on, can you maybe add one or two things that you do to maybe help them track, or what information you're feeding back to them so you know how they're doing? Like, how does that process work? Do you have field consultants advising them?
Yeah, so all of our field consultants, I'm very fortunate. They all came from other brands, so they have franchise experience, and they all have pretty good financial acumen. And so at this point, that's the kind of feedback that we provide to them, more on a ad hoc type situation, unless they're in trouble. And then it gets a little bit deeper, obviously, and people at our home office get involved. I wish I could say, just transparent, I wish I could say I had people sitting in the home office looking at them more in, on an everyday basis, a monthly basis, but to have the manpower to do that's really difficult. I am fortunate that we share a database with our franchisees. They use our proprietary ERP, so we do have insight to them, so nobody has to turn in financials to us. So we do have access to them at all times.
Okay, very good. So Erik, on to you. I know you said you're just kind of getting into franchising and want to learn more and do stuff, and then you also mentioned on the call being like a big fish in a small pond. Can you touch on some of the things that the current state of your company, how it's helping the franchisees, and kind of what you're doing to mentor and guide them along the way?
Yeah, sure. So, coming from the franchisor perspective, it's a little bit different. But I do go down, to, some of the things about, at the end of the day, as a franchisor, you make your money, more often than not on top line sales. But I would argue where you really make your money is on unit growth and survival, and success of your franchisees. And so it's very important for us that they're not just profitable, but they have a high return on investment. Because, and one of the things that we're trying to do as we grow is we've got a small format that we're putting into hotels. So when they do conversions, we're trying to catch them right at the time when they're already doing a remodel, or they're moving from one brand to another, or buying. Because if we're in the restaurant business, and I'll share with you, the most expensive part of that is really the guts, right? The freezers, the walk-in freezers, the grease traps, the hoods, all those kind of things. And let alone the kitchen space and everything. And if we can catch them when all of that's already in place, then their investment level is really low. And then we bring in different revenue streams for them. So their financial health is the only way we're going to grow. And whether or not that's our strategy or somebody, you have your own, as a franchisor, it's critical, I think, that you make your, and by the way, the least expensive unit growth you're going to get is from an existing franchisee. And they're going to do that not just because they're profitable, but because they have a very high, return on invested capital. So you want to make yourself to a point where getting into it balances well, with the profit that they're going to expect, and monitor that very closely. The other thing as a franchisor, it's very important that you're healthy and that you're growing, because the banks, when they go to finance the franchisees, are going to say, is this a name that I can lend against, And they're going to care very, very much, again, going back to, well, you put up 10, but 2 of them didn't quite make it. And they're very concerned. You might have the greatest story in the world and the hottest product. The banks are going to care about the numbers. And for them, it's all about mitigating risk. So those are some of the things that we would do. And then on a more tactical level, for us, we're about to have an oven replacement program. And so we're working with a couple of equipment lessors that are giving us a favorable rate if we get to a certain number of franchisors who are franchisees who join us as company restaurants in financing their new ovens that way. So constantly be looking out for how can you help your franchisees' financial position is sort of, the thing that I would pass on.
Can you, before you pass on, can you touch a little bit on that oven program and the work that you're doing as the franchisor to get that set up? Like, you're the one making all those calls and building the relationships so you can lay it out for the franchisees?
Well, we're kind of coming it from 2 paths. The oven manufacturer, I will tell you right now, wants to, do the absorbees and all of that kind of thing. And then, my CFO is basically, he's got a couple people he's new, so he's been successful with them in the past. The big thing that I'm trying to do is work with my board and say, look, this is what we can do for the community. I'm owned by private equity, okay, and if we guarantee it, and I've got to speak their language. It's almost like a collateral, a CDO, and say, look, if we collateralize the whole thing, we can do it. Everyone can do it for a lot cheaper, and we spread the risk and all that kind of thing. So, there's some things like that that are just, probably unique for a private equity-owned, franchisor.
Which I think many people in the room, they want to end up going that route. There's a lot of private equity sitting on the table here. You, Ryan, me, so. All right, very good. I'm going to jump to Steve first because I want to tie in what Steve's going to say into what Ryan is. So we're on the subject of loans. So Steve, right now, can you talk about average loan size, what your company does, why maybe some banks may or may not want to lend to your company because of the loan size, and how you're navigating all that?
Yeah, that's a problem for me, is that my loan size is too small. So there are a lot of funding companies that don't want to mess with my brand because I'm every bit as my sub $200,000 loan is every bit as much work as a multi-million-dollar restaurant loan. And I appreciate the honesty when somebody says, you're just not the right size for us. Fine, we can still be friends, but that's a challenge for me. So I've been out for years trying to sell ourselves to various funding sources, saying, here's why it's important to invest in PuroClean. Here's what we got. Yes, we're a sub $200,000 startup loan, but there's a lot that comes with that in the growth over the years. So that's what we're out there doing all the time. And I think you got to look in the mirror, right? As a Zor, you got to look in the mirror and say, look, first of all, you can't have like a vendor customer mentality, because you are not the ideal customer for every funding source out there. And it's a partnership, and you got to realize that, and you got to figure out which partner is right for you, who works well with you. And we never work with just one, but it's important for us to have somebody invested with us. It has to do with a lot of our success, right? It has to do with deal speed on the front end. It has to do with, qualifying and finding the right people for our franchise system. All that stuff's baked into it. And I think that a lot of franchisors I talk to are taking too tactical an approach to this. I need to find somebody who can fund our deals right now and get us funding, and it's all now. And look, I have nothing. I have no problem about acting tactical, but I don't see enough people thinking strategic. You need to think strategic, and you need to say, who's somebody that I can commit to long term? Who's somebody that's willing to commit to me long term? And where we can have a mutually beneficial partnership where everybody wins. Because if you're not looking at it that way, you're going to end up with a series of short-term partners, and it's a lot of work starting up these new relationships with people. And I've had people come out of the woodwork to me and say, hey, we want to finance this, that, or the other thing with you guys. And I'd say, frankly, I'm not really interested in talking to you because I have good funding partners right now, and I'm not willing to disrupt those relationships.
So Steve, with that loan size being what it is, what are some creative things that you have to come up with? Like, are you doing some equipment financing as opposed to just funding the whole thing?
Well, first of all, we're kind of a truck-based franchise system because, when your house gets hurt, you can't take it to the ER. ER's got to come to you. So we come in on a truck. We don't have retail locations. Nobody takes their home or office to a retail location for repair. And so we have to go there. And so we're all about the trucks. And so we've had to be really creative. We've had partners that were just leasing for equipment, just leasing for vehicles, and just funding startup funding. And so we've had to be really creative with those things. And the last few years of vehicle shortages did not help us because we were like scouring the country just for available vehicles first, and then second having to worry about getting them financed. And so it's been a real challenge the last few years. It's really smoothing out now nicely, but we've had to use we had the biggest supplier in our industry owned a leasing company, and their approach was anybody that you approve to become a franchisee of PuroClean, we will guarantee the leasing funding of their equipment package. And then in the middle of COVID, they went, we're going to exit that business. And they sold the company. and the company said, we will still want to work with you, but we're not interested in doing any startup financing. A $5 million a year franchisee doesn't need your leasing package. So, you're not helping me. So we've had some real ups and downs in that. And you have to be creative, and you have to be creative even in the startup financing, right? Who comes to this? Because our loan is not a huge loan, people can fund it with a loan from their 401k and, doing those kinds of things, loaning themselves the money. And so we see a lot of creative finance options, so you need to be able to work with somebody that can do those for you as well.
Very good. That was actually a perfect segue, unintentional. So Ryan, can you, being on both sides, you were a franchisor, a supplier, a developer, can you give us a little just background history of what you've seen in this space, and then maybe get into some of the structures like, ROBs, heat locks, and things like that you've had to bring to the table to get your franchisees financed?
Sure, it's a big topic. So let me start by talking about my experience as a franchisor, which is kind of the theme we've been on. Obviously we want to do everything we can to have healthy franchisees, but I think the most important thing you can do for your franchisees as a franchisor, it's your responsibility, is to have resources for them so they can easily put their numbers together and it all goes into a portal to understand how they're doing compared to other franchisees, right? That was a game changer for us when we did it. This was years ago. We brought in Profit Keeper. And Profit Keeper, we had a standard chart of accounts, that all of our franchisees had to put their numbers into, because prior to that, they were all doing it their own way. Their local accountant was figuring out how they were going to put their books together, and it was everybody doing it different. So when it came time to put together the item 7 or the item 19 for the next year, we didn't have clear information. The other thing I think you can do in a pretty inexpensive way is have an outsourced partner for your franchisees to use for their financials, right? Negotiate a rate, because you're going to have a group discount, hopefully, if you get a lot of franchisees to use it. Now they're all talking to the same accountant who's looking at dozens and dozens of different franchisees to tell them how they're doing compared. So you've got a single source of truth kind of doing the books, then you put it all into a portal where they can compare. And then if you really want to make it more of a something that's enticing for them, we would then at the end of the year, always, and sometimes throughout the year, we would put together annual reports showing what the best franchisees were doing. How much were they spending on marketing compared to sales? What were they doing in payroll? All the other things about the business, and that became very valuable to them. When we didn't have it, I remember we would put certain franchisees into validation, and that franchisee would say, "Oh, we're not making any money." And I'd be like, what is he talking about? He's making a bunch of money, right? Well, according to his books, he wasn't making money because he was putting personal travel and education and a lot of things that weren't necessarily applicable to the exact franchise model. So if you stripped all those things out, the franchise was making a lot. But when I got them on validation, they would talk about how they weren't making much. And again, that was our fault, is because we didn't have an inside view as to what they were doing with a single chart of accounts. So I think that's table stakes, is to go find a partner that allows you to do that. And then, just from the development side, if a franchisor knocks on our door and says, "Hey, would you consider developing for us?" If you don't have that information, if we don't have clear information that's easily accessible, then we can't put together, again, the item 7, the item 19, and the other things in order to put together a compelling FDD. Those things are very important when your next group of franchisees consider your opportunity, because they may not only be considering your opportunity, they're considering many others, and the financial return is a very important part of their decision. So you need to clearly articulate what is the financial return on your business model using existing franchisee numbers. We often would get franchisors that would say, "Well, we don't have many franchisees yet," or "We don't have access to their data, we only have our own." We'd say, "Okay, well, we can start there, let's take a look." But the problem was it was meshed, right? They had their own corporate locations or service provider or whatever it was, and their corporate infrastructure and the books were meshed together. And so then we couldn't determine what is a franchisee doing compared to what their corporate expenses were easily. We had to really carve all those things out, and it took a lot of time. So I think, again, just table stakes, make sure you got some way of allowing your franchisees to do their books and put it in a portal and then compare it to the top performers. Second part of the question around what did we use to get our franchisees funded, or what do we use now, right? We do many deals, and we recognize we are not funding experts, and so we let the experts do it for us. So Fran Fund, Benetrends are the two that we use primarily. And we work with them. Every time we bring a brand in, we will ask, this is the type of brand that we think we're going to advertise. We know we're going to have a lot of people looking at it. What should we be thinking about for this brand? Is it too low for most of the banks to consider? Is it too high? What type of collateral do we need? And all the other things that are important. So lots of ROBs, lots of SBAs, a decent amount of HELOC when it comes into play. Sometimes a combination of ROBs and SBAs, which ROB is a rollover program for their 401k funds that they can use, basically borrowing against themselves. So, it's not great detail in there, and if you want us to get into greater detail, we probably can. But I think my main message would be we don't try to be the experts at the funding. We leave that to the experts, and we just outsource it.
And with the like the ROBs and the HELOCs and things like that, what are you seeing out in the marketplace? Are franchisees getting the financing that they need? Is there a lot more documentation requests now? Like, what is that? How important is it for those franchisees to be organized, get their stuff together, know what they're doing, and presenting the package, as opposed to things being just all over the place and nobody knows what's in front of them?
Yeah, well, it can't be all over the place, right? It has to be organized. And again, that's what's nice about our partners, is they help our clients get organized before they go and shop that business to the bank. So I believe, and some of the experts in the room might disagree with me, I think it's getting easier because we're further away from COVID. Okay. Like during COVID times, one of the things that was really challenging was prior to COVID, banks would say, even if you put more than 20% into a deal, we will reimburse you to make you whole back to only having 20% in. Well, during COVID, I believe the way that it worked is they said, well, you've got this money in, we're not going to reimburse you back all the way to your only 20% in. You've got 200 grand in, and that equals 40%. Well, that is what it is. That's your injection, right? Which would then oftentimes lead to clients wanting to put deposits down because they didn't want to go over their 20% before they could get their lending, and deposits are really difficult to manage, right? So I would not recommend that you get into that, but we had to. It was a necessity during COVID. Now, I think it's, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I think that funding has become, easier is the wrong word, but we are not having problems getting deals done because of a lack of funding.
Under 500,000 service-based business, they'll reimburse over 20% again.
They will, yeah.
Not on bricks and mortar.
And I believe you don't have to have as much personal collateral down under 500,000, right?
Personal collateral.
Right. So, things,
Sherry, you want to touch it? Go for it.
please.
No, I was just adding, I agree with Ryan, it is getting a bit easier. I think we're learning exactly what lenders are looking for. And of course, the SBA, they have made some, they've strengthened some of their requirements to the banks, which of course trickles down to the candidates. But also, they're right now waiving the guarantee fee for loans under $1 million, which is tremendous, and that's a gift to the borrower. They're, waiving the personal collateral on service-based businesses. That's another gift. Most banks are offering first 9 months of payments interest-free, which is another benefit. This government shutdown, what it will do is make the SBA stop issuing loan numbers, which means we can still work on packages, but we will not be able to move them forward with the lender until then we get in the queue for a new loan number and move forwards. But yeah, we're having great success getting qualified people funded. Cool.
Yeah, it's great.
Right.
Oh,
What's the deal time now on an SBA Express 150 loan?
Okay, first of all, that's a
gone
made-up
now.
name. That's an SBA 7A loan.
That's what we all call
And
it.
it's, there's a limited number of lenders that play in that space. And they run from, let's say, 30 to 60 days, probably averaging somewhere around 40.
Are they back in that range? Because that was a problem for us during, as you're talking about, Ryan, COVID times. That blew up to over 100 days for us, and that was killing deals, because time kills all deals.
Yep.
There's essentially one lender that does sort of exactly that product that you're talking about, and they are cherry picking now. So I wouldn't, it's probably not the best avenue to go. Just a regular 7A loan will accommodate most of that, although it does not accommodate deposits and some of those other things as well as that particular lender.
Yeah, Ron.
I want to add something that is probably not going to be very popular.
Go for it.
If you're not all stress testing your business model against 12% interest rates, then you're doing a disservice to your franchisees. Because it might be that the bank will do the loan with 15 or 20% down, but your business model won't work with 12% interest rates and 20% down. So you've got to stress test your own business model and say what can it tolerate and what you don't want, and all the lenders in the room will tell you this, you don't want unit failures. If your item 20 gets ugly, the banks are going to stop lending completely to your brand. Hands down. So stress test your own business model would be my takeaway.
Thank you, Ron. Blake, you had a
A
question?
little bit on what he's saying. So I own some pizza franchise.
Okay.
Rates are going up 12%, but yes, normally you can handle that 12%, but food costs are up and it pays up. I'm seeing the profits are extremely tight right now. What's the solution to that? Maybe you have that answer, I guess.
Let's go, pizza guy.
Rate is part of that, so I'm seeing that. That was one of my questions when we were here, but I guess more for you.
Yeah.
Payroll and food costs on top of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think everybody is seeing wage increase. I can't imagine anyone not. So I'll deal with that one first, and then come back to food costs. So You know, the big thing that we've done, you know, with our wages is, you know, we've re-engineered the way, you know, we do a lot of our work. You know, who does what at what rates. We've taken a lot of the more complicated things on our menu off the menu, so that we don't need quite as many cooks. We absolutely had to sharpen our pencils on things like, you know, who works what hours. And I'll tell you another kind of oddball thing that's helped along quite a bit. We changed our fiscal week to end on Tuesday. Now, why would I do that? Because before it ended on Sunday, and so what happens is if you get behind during the week, then what do you do for the weekend, right? Right, especially in the restaurant business where that's where you're expecting people. Well, you start cutting labor to make your week or whatever, right? And so that's dangerous on customer service, and then all of a sudden you get, you know, for us, there's, you know, 9-year-old Erik would kill, you know, however old I am now, Erik, because I do rain dances in the summer, you know, for every weekend, because we get flooded with people. And so you're either doing overtime or bad customer service. And so this gave us the time that we could, you know, flex our labor a little bit more on our slowest 2 days. So we did a couple of things like that, for sure. Made a lot more of our annual increases incentive-based, and that seems to have worked just fine. I did one crazy thing, which did not cost a lot of money and was a lot less than bonuses. That we came out of COVID, and I gave, you know, we're doing, you know, pretty big-sized restaurants. Gave all my general managers round-trip ticket for 2 anywhere in the continental United States, which sounds like, oh my God, it's less than most bonuses.
Yeah.
And so, and then, by the way, they had to post it to our Facebook page. So every week there was someone, look at this, look at this. So we did some unique things like that. I would also say the other thing that you can do to keep wage rates down is retention. Because it's, first off, you know, getting a new customer, we all know how expensive that is. Getting a new hire is also very expensive. And, you know, and typically people move jobs because they want more. People stay because they love the culture and environment. And those are things that are, you know, as a finance, you know, pedigreed person, you know, what I love about having a great, you know, treating your people well and expressing gratitude and keeping them stay, it's free. So you just have to do it. So.
But did you raise prices? That's the
So
other-
we absolutely raised.
Of course.
Of
course they did.
No, yeah, so just in terms of the cost structure itself, we absolutely raised prices along with the industry, but we also tried to change our mix as well towards our best margin thing, which is pizza. So we got, you know, pretty good on that. And so those are really the big things we did. What we can never do, and I know some of the, you know, our other casual dining chain competitors have done, we won't change our food quality one iota. You know, it's very tempting to do so, but it is death by a million paper cuts. Oh, these breadsticks taste exactly the way the other ones do, and they're a penny less each, and you can do the math. But then you throw all those things together in the same recipe, and people leave, and they're like, I mean, at the end of the day, value is, I paid so much, was it worth it? And if you're like, yeah, that wasn't that great, they're not coming back.
Not coming back.
So.
There's a question in the back, yeah.
Yeah, so from a funding standpoint, so we have a unique business model. Like you're familiar with restaurants, so from getting our franchisees funding with a solution that meets like the carbon footprint that everybody's looking for, whether it's like ESG or like the NFTD for environmental applications. What is the bank looking for in order to fund based on meeting that criteria? Because there's not really a lot of information out there on it. Like with tax credits, like, okay, like in a kitchen, like you do steam cleaning for hoods, let's say, you use 100 gallons of water and 10 gallons of chemicals. Our service uses no chemicals, no water, no plastic byproduct, nothing going down into your grease trap. So the environmental side, like ESG, is like, wow, this is amazing. But how do we get the bank who has funds available for that to give us an easy button to get that financing over just what is a traditional sub 300, sub 200 7A loan?
I have to plead ignorance.
Yeah, anybody up here? Otherwise, I know there's other finance people. Anybody in the room? There's some,
I have not heard
Rock-
that guess.
Yeah, get Rocco,
Maybe
yeah.
somebody else has, but.
I'm not sure if you're asking if the lenders have grants for your product,
So, like,
it's
I'll
a
give you one
restriction for them to
example
lend.
that I'm trying to like crack the code on. So, like McDonald's, the government has forced them to put money into an account, and the money can only be used for carbon reduction processes to increase their ESG score within the company. So we're working with them to be able to come in and laser clean their kitchen equipment using no water, no chemicals, which gives their score a bump. And now they have access to those funds to pay for the service where they can't currently touch that money.
I don't know if anybody up here, but if Rocco or Ron or Sherry or.
Lender, restricted you or required you to do anything that relates to that.
So ESG right now is trying to give us like a roadmap.
Right.
Because there's like, I think, a $3 trillion fund, they said, that's sitting for this type of process, like mold removal. If we can do it with no chemicals and no water, that's a huge bonus.
So ESG is driving that.
Is driving it.
Yeah, and are you willing as a franchisor to subsidize some of that?
Yes, correctly.
So then that would be a plus to, I think, to Sherry's point, I don't know that the lenders are aware of that. I think that's more ESG driven. But if any of the lenders have not restricted or required that, it shouldn't be a problem for you to get funding. It's probably a plus that you as a franchisor are contributing to that.
Yeah, we don't have, like our franchisees don't have trouble getting the funding.
Yeah.
It's more the tax credit side of it. And like, so if there's a banker who told me about a program that they look at from an ecological standpoint with that footprint, that's the part I'm trying to figure out. Like, and I have some of the details, I just don't want to like bear the room.
Well, I'm going to say that probably the SBA itself may know something about
Sure.
that, but lenders, SBA doesn't actually lend the money, so it's the lenders that take on the responsibility for that. So there may be a disconnect in what's available and what lenders are willing to do. I don't
Yeah,
know.
because I think the problem that I see is you have a lender who has like a certain criteria that, let's say, McDonald's has to meet, or anybody who needs that loan to get that tax credit. They know that it exists on paper if you give them the paperwork, but nobody knows how to execute it for that money to be freed up.
And I'm guessing that McDonald's doesn't use SBA loans.
Right.
McDonald's just wants the money already earned that's in the account to be able to say we can use it without the repercussions.
There are tax credit firms, not ours, but there are tax credit firms that just specifically focus on those types of things. They'll prepare the form that the business owner is required to submit, and they'll actually hand that form over to whoever's preparing the tax return to include that to take the credit. So I can make some intros for you offline that we refer to for stuff like that. So, okay. Cool. All right, thank you for the question. So we're going to switch topics for the last few minutes, and we're going to move it up a level to the franchisor side. So Kim, why don't you touch on the importance of our internal franchisor financial strength, what those are supposed to look at, why people should care about them.
Well, I'll start with what's probably the most attractive, and that is you want to present, I think, to potential candidates that you're a reputable and a strong franchisor. They see your financials, they see those audited financials, and I know if I was investing, for us, ours happens to be a very large investment. If I was investing maybe, my retirement or my life savings, I'd want to know that I was doing that with a company that had things together. I'm not seeing somebody that's so debt laden that they're not going to be able to give me good support or something like that. Also for the item 19, you're going to have good information and backup for that information. You can't just pick those numbers out of the sky. And I think, again, people are looking for the item 19. That's something that we added about 4 years ago. Prior to that, we had never had one. And when I came to the brand, I was surprised they did not, and because they had great results. They just had not implemented that, and that makes a big difference when you have sophisticated candidates, people coming from other brands that are used to, maybe there are multi-unit owners and other brands. We have several of those. They're looking for that item 19, so you want to be able to have that for them. And then I think, you know, if you need financing as a franchisor, another reason, for all the same reasons as a franchisee would, the bank would be looking for the same things. And then I have to touch on the audit. I'm not an auditor, so that's not my background, but the audit is very labor intensive. If you have good records, it moves along a lot quicker. And we sell product also, so we're not just the franchisor, we're also distributing product. So for us, it could be anywhere from, you know, 500 to 700 documents that we're going to have to give them for the audit. And if you're organized, you can be able to get through that quickly. And again, then it goes back to what they're going to see in the FDD as far as what your audit comes out to.
So, Kim, since yours is a bigger investment, do you actually have franchisees reading the financials? Because I know many times the franchisees just pass over that attachment. Do you notice that does not happen in your system and they're paying attention to that document?
Yeah, they do pay attention to that. And even our current franchisees do. So we had an ownership change about 9 years ago, and they wanted to see, you know, what's going to be different, right? People are looking for that. And they wanted to know if the new owner was investing back into the business, right? And so that shows. So we had a lot of our, you know, 20-plus year franchisees now looking at the FDD, okay, wanting to see what was real. We're a privately owned company, so, you know, a lot of our information is not public outside of that FDD. Yep. So I think absolutely they look at it.
Cool. Thanks. Ryan, can you touch a little bit on, you know, entity setup, structure, you know, and maybe even touch on how you brought your company to, you know, a PE sale?
PE sale. Come to the round tables later. There's a lot that goes into that. But yeah, the entity structure is interesting because when you set up your entity, you're not really thinking about what's that going to do to my balance sheet later in my franchise agreement. But oftentimes I see that become a problem. And what I mean by that is you go to your lawyer and they say, sure, you want an entity for your corporate business and you want an entity for your franchise business. And a lot of times the majority of the cash stays in this entity, and then you just pump money over to the franchise business as it's needed, right? But you go through your audit, and I don't know, for easy math, let's say you got $1 million over here in the corporate entity and you got $100,000 sitting here in the franchise entity. But they take the balance sheet from the franchise entity and they put it into your FDD. Then you send it to a state registrations office and they say, you don't have enough money, right? We don't believe that you are financially solid enough to support a franchisee. So now we're going to take that franchise fee and we're going to stick it in escrow. Or we're going to make a franchisee open before that you're going to be able to receive that franchise fee fund. So now you've got people and training and everything else invested into the opening of that location, but you haven't been able to receive any of the franchise fee, which most franchisors use a portion of that money to do those things, right? So there's nothing wrong with having two separate entities, but be sure you want your franchise entity, which is going to be shown in the franchise agreement, to be cash rich, if it can be, then you're not going to run into as many state registration problems. Along those lines too, this isn't necessarily a financial question, but in the item 20, when it talks about how many locations you plan on opening in states, I'd go to all of the registration states, and if you think there's a chance you're going to open one there, even if it's a small chance, I'd put a 1, because I've also seen that you'll send it over to a state registrations office and they say, well, you don't need to register in our state because you don't plan on opening any here. So go away until you do plan on it. So it doesn't really hurt anything. Just throw a single unit in that registration state. So that way, when you send it to the registration office, if you need that state, they recognize why you're doing that. Cool. Specifically, are you talking private equity and how the entity relates to the transaction?
Yeah, and how really on your side, because you brought your company to private equity. So just a couple of quick points on the build up to that, because I'm sure many people here want to do that in the future.
Oh yeah, there's so much that goes into it. I mean, the most important is have a growing, successful, profitable business with franchisees that are happy, right? I mean, if I really had to sum it up, it's going to come into those things. There's a lot that goes into it. Again, back to the earlier point, is you want to have everything very buttoned up, because you're going to go through a quality of earnings process where they're going to dive into all of your financials, and they're going to say, yeah, it's great that you provided us your financials, but we don't know you and we don't trust you, so we're going to go do our own research to make sure that we believe and we feel everything you've given us is true and inaccurate. Because if we're going to invest this money into your business, we now are going to go have to borrow money from a bank. That bank is going to add covenants on top of us that we're going to have to meet, and we need to be sure that that business is going to perform the way that you said it was going to perform. So I think there's a lot that goes into that, but at the heart of it is have a brand that is profitable, growing, happy franchisees, has room to grow still, because the private equity group that buys you doesn't plan on owning it forever to create cash. They want to grow it to sell it again, usually, and then just make sure it's going to be easy for them to understand the financial outlook of the business.
Cool. Thanks, Ryan. Steve, Ryan mentioned a little earlier about the registration states and escrow status. Do you mind elaborating a little bit more on what that means? Have you had any of those experiences where you had to defer in certain states, and how that could cash strap
Sure.
the franchisor also if you have to do that?
Well, when I was recruited to PuroClean, the brand was crashing, unfortunately. It had gone through some difficult leadership, and so it was way down from where it had peaked, and it was crashing, and financially it wasn't pretty. So we had a lot of work to do to be what Ryan described as a growing franchise with happy franchisees. I'm happy to report that today we are growing phenomenally, and our franchisees are incredibly happy. Part of the reasons they're incredibly happy is we make sure they make a lot of money. So those are all really important factors. By the way, you mentioned FDD earlier. For those of you who might think that most franchise owners aren't capable of really sifting through an FDD, it only takes one. Well, I got a franchisee with an MBA from Kellogg, and that dude goes through every, and then he tells everybody else. So you only need one franchisee that understands an FDD, and they're all going to know what's in there. So just be transparent. And that's my belief, is the best thing is to be transparent anyway. So the registration states, you know that there are some states that we do, and also some Canadian provinces, because we're also in Canada, that require provincial registration, and the rest are what we call show and go, right? And so we file there, and then we can immediately start selling them. We did in the early days have some challenges that way, where because we had multiple corporate entities like Ryan described, we would show what they called a negative owner's equity in the company, and then we are having to escrow those fees, and it's just a big pain in the butt, and you just don't want to go there. So it's really important that you have, first of all, an accounting firm that really understands franchising and those issues, and make sure that you're there, and then you try and play by those rules, because it's not going to make you impossible. It's not going to make it impossible for you to franchise in those states and provinces. It's just going to make it slower and more difficult for you to realize the money, and it's a challenge, and it's not, at the end of the day, really a hard negative, but it can be a perceived negative, and in franchising sometimes the perceived negatives are worse than the hard negatives. So it's just important that you pay attention to those things and be there. We're at a place today where we're really careful about those things, and it's really important. And again, try and be really transparent. Just tell the franchise owners what's the real deal, right? What's really going on in the company. I think they appreciate that, and they see it, and it grows their trust and confidence about being a part of your franchise.
Cool. Thanks, Steve. I want to keep everybody on time for the other session, so we have a couple of minutes. Any questions for the audience, for the panel, before we look to wrap up? While we have them up here. Nope. All right, so then, yeah, good.
Steve, how many units do you have? Like, you mentioned that you had kind of like a rough period when you came in.
Yeah.
Like, how many units did you have at that time versus like where you're at today?
Oh, okay. So this month is my 10th anniversary as the leader of PuroClean. We are now at 450 units. So we were 220 when I walked in the door, and they were failing every week. Every week the count was going down. So, you come to a franchise event and your peers say, whoa, how many units did you add this year? And when I came to PuroClean, I had to say, no. First job was arrest the decline. Second job was get stability. Third job was start growing it again. So the summary on my 10 years in leadership is we are now 2x number of operating locations. So we're 2x the number of units. our average unit sales are 3x, our system-wide sales are 4x, and our EBITDA is way more X than that. So, and my mission was to not only turn it, but to get it sold. And they thought it would take 5 years and probably go to private equity auction. And instead, it took 2 years. 2 years and 2 weeks to the day from when I started. As a matter of fact, today is the 8th anniversary of my new ownership, and I consider myself blessed. We did not go to private equity. We went to two private industry buyers. They own other companies in the restoration space that do not fit the franchise model, so we're their only franchise investment, and they have been phenomenal. I couldn't be more lucky or blessed than these two cats, because they knew that my first 2 years I was operating on very little resources. Yeah. So 8 years ago when they bought, I do regional meetings in the fall, and they came with me and they said, they knew they needed to buy the trust of the franchisees, and they said, we will not take a profit distribution for 2 years. For 2 years, we'll reinvest every dollar of profit into better and more programs for you, the franchisees, because we know this Steve White guy's been working with handcuffs on for 2 years. And so they did not do 2 years not taking a profit distribution. They went almost 5. So fortunately, they're very wealthy guys, and their other companies make them a ton of money, so they don't really have a need to take it. And so we're in a really, really good place as a result of that. But it wouldn't have mattered if we'd have sold to private investors or private equity. The process is still the same, right? You gotta have a great company. You gotta have a good story. You have to have clean financials. You gotta do those things. You put those things in place, people line up to buy you, right? While I'm here, I'm being asked by multiple private equity firms for appointments. My guys have stated they are not selling, right? My lead guy's 55 years old, and he says, I'm not selling in my lifetime. My kids are gonna own this someday after I'm dead and gone. And so, but I mean, we still talk to people. I think you have to conduct yourself that way in the marketplace, right? Like you're always for sale, whether you are or whether you're not, because it keeps you sharp.
Cool. Jim, you had a question?
Got my curiosity piqued. How did you do it?
Do what?
Do what?
I'm sure you did many things to turn it around, but is there like one program or one or two things, key things that you?
Yeah, I really think it was installing the culture that I learned. I feel like I learned at the feet of the master. I was at Domino's Pizza in a time when it was still run by the founder, and the guy worried about franchisees every single day of his life. And then later I was in a company called Allegra in the graphic arts space, and we had the opportunity to do a management buyout there, and he knew about it, and he came to us and said, you guys be the operating partners, I'll be the financing partner. And so I got to be in that deal with him for another 12 years and just learn from this guy who puts franchisees first every single day, right? That guy's now well into his 80s and sold his majority share to Bain Capital in December of 1999. And 2 months ago, I met an attorney from Domino's Pizza, and I asked if he ever still came around, knowing he's well into his 80s. He said he came in recently. We asked him to sit with a small group of our top franchisees. He asked us in advance to pull performance data, and he walked into the meeting, and he could tell every single person there how they were performing and what they could do to perform better. And so, I learned that guy, look, franchisees first. To me, it's a very simple equation. It's servant leadership that puts the franchisees first, right? And both those words are important. You've got to serve. You lead by serving, and you serve by leading. And you got to do both those things. Second is accountability. You got to be accountable. When I came to the company, I was told by the franchisees that every year at convention, the executives would stand on stage and make promises of big new programs. And they said we would all stand and applaud, and then we would never hear another word about those things after convention. The next year they'd do the same thing, and like idiots, we'd stand and applaud again. And so I went in and I said, okay, accountability, they don't trust us because there's no accountability. So my first 2 or 3 conventions, my speeches were in 3 parts. First, here's everything you were promised a year ago and a complete accountability, counting on all those things. Second, here's where we stand today. Third, here's some promises going forward. And when they hear you doing that consistently, you start to build trust. It all leads to being true partners with your franchisees, right? The buzzword's active collaboration. But I don't think any franchise system gets to active collaboration until, one, you demonstrated that you're a servant leader, right? And second, that you demonstrated that you can be trusted to keep your word and do the things that you say you're gonna do. Then and only then do franchisees really become true partners with you. That's what it's really about. Now you're humming. Look, if you're in a lot of franchise sectors, it's nice to have. I'm in the emergency services business. My national accounts are 3 of the top 5 residential property insurers in America. We're an insurance pay business. I have to have active collaboration with my franchisees. I have to. My franchisees don't even know this yet, I'm about to announce the addition of a new insurance carrier to our national accounts portfolio, and that carrier has made it clear in no uncertain terms that in our pilot program, they want us to be as invested as our franchisees are. So I need that partnership. So once we got that culture in place, it took me about 6 months. Ever since, it's just been refining and refining and refining. And you have to keep doing those things, right? Because at the rate that we're growing, every year we have a significant portion of our population that's in their first 2 years, and they don't know how we demonstrated our credibility 3 years ago, 5 years ago, all those things, right? So that's the Cliff Notes version of it.
Very good.
Happy to share more.
Please, yeah.
Steve, I realize this could be an entire other session, so I'm gonna ask, but I hope we'll be able to be a short answer. I'm Diane Davis. I'm from Happy and Healthy Snack Foods. I'm in a similar situation where I've taken over CEO as a turnaround brand. And as someone who's in the weeds on that right now, learning a lot and experiencing a lot, when did you, after taking this over, did you say, we're starting to turn this thing around? How long did that go?
It was about 6 months.
It took 6 months. Okay.
Yeah, it took about 6 months. I had to go out there. The franchisees were really, really angry. And when I met them, I learned that they had every right to be. So first thing you got to do is you got to go listen to them, right? And I would have franchisees just rant and yell. And they would sometimes catch themselves and say, look, I know you're not the one that did this to us. And I would say, no, you got to get it off your chest or we can't go forward, right? What did I say? I used to say, some days my job is to kill you with kindness, and some days my job is to simply wear out your fist with my chin. I don't care what today is. I have a really thick hide, and I have a really strong chin, and you just got to unburden yourself. And every now and then I would hear their story, and I would say, man, did anybody ever apologize to you? Because if not, may I? Because that should never happen in a franchise world. And I mean, you just got to be real, and you got to be available. You know, when we got the company sold, I thought I would exit. And the new owners asked me to stay for 1 year for continuity. And how do I say no? And I asked these franchisees, you can't turn a franchise around by yourself. You got to have a partnership with the franchisees. And I asked them to take my hand and help me, and they did. How do I just walk away from them? So they asked me if I'd stay 1 year. That was 8 years ago today. So here I still am. But it's the smallest franchise I've ever been in my life. I've never had more fun. And I'm really excited to do it. But a huge part of it too is they got to make money. And so I go back to what Ryan said earlier about the franchisee financials, and you got to know to do that, and you got to collect those numbers. And you got to, whether you do it monthly, annually, whatever you do, you got to bring it back to them on their level so that they really get this and understand the value of it and the importance of it. And one of the things that we do that's very simple is we do a system-wide study, right, on ratios. And so we've developed a simplified, literally an Excel spreadsheet. Here's the first column, here's all our ratios. Second column, here's how the median scores on our national performance are. Here's the top quartiles scores. And then we can have the ability to take an individual franchisee's numbers and lay them right in there. And then their field support person can go right down that spreadsheet and go, look, you want to know why you don't have the same profitability as the top profit guys? Because it's right here. You're 4 points off in labor, you're 2 points off in this, you're 1 point off in that. And it focuses where we go to work, and then boom, that money falls to the bottom line. Owner's discretionary profit grows, so the value of their business grows because it's a multiple of profitability. But ultimately, someday they're going to sell it, right? I tell every graduating class of new franchisees, on graduation day, it's time to think about your exit strategy. You know, I don't want you to circle a date on a calendar when you're going to leave PuroClean. I just want you to say, what is it you ultimately want to accomplish here? Because what is that someday thing? We're in business here. We're here. I'm in this business to change people's lives. The sales number does not change their life. The profit number changes their life. And it makes it better with lenders. It makes it better with future buyers of your franchise or your franchisees. It's really, really important for us to speak the language of finance.
Thank you.
I think that's all the time we have. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.